Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we're talking about Three Identical Strangers today, which is a documentary, partially dramatised but essentially documentary, about... Well, it's easy to spoil, so I'll give a précis of how the film kind of begins. You begin with this guy who was born in 1961, who is now, however you're old if you were born in 1961.
He's 19 in the film.
No, I mean now, literally today.
57.
Right. Yeah, he's now 57. And he's the subject of a documentary speaking directly to the audience through the camera. And he says, when I was 19 in 1980, I went to this new school and everyone started greeting me. They said, Eddie, how are you? Great to see you. And I said, what are you talking about? I don't know who any of you people are. And it very quickly transpires that he was separated at birth from an identical twin. And they discover this identical twin. The story makes it into the papers, and through the papers, a third of the pair, a triplet, shows up. There were these three triplets who were separated at birth in 1961, and the story, their story develops as to how they grew up, the various families that they were adopted by. Where they come from. They're all from New York. They all live within about 100-mile radius of each other, they say at one point. But they one is from a kind of upper class family, one is from a middle class family, one from a blue collar family. But they all seem to be completely identical. Like, they all like the same cigarettes, they have the same taste in women, and they act the same, and they think the same, and so on and so forth. And they look identical. They kind of glue onto each other immediately. They become this inseparable group. And I guess, this is where spoiler territory will have to come in, because from then on, there are developments. Why were they separated? The question is asked. Why were they separated? The parents are really angry about it.
Yes.
And they want to know why this Jewish adoption agency. They're Jewish kids, and it's this premier adoption agency in New York for Jewish kids in particular. Why did they separate them? What happened? And that is the very basic précis. We will have to get into spoiler territory very quickly.
Yeah, we're now spoiling everything. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious to know what you thought.
Well, what I was going to say is that I remember reading about this when it came out. When it was revealed. I remember reading a story, a People magazine story, in either 1980 and 1981, when all of this was being advertised about how amazing it was. And it really was a nature versus nurture argument, in which what was seen to be amazing was people's genetic legacies, i.e., these kids that had been separated for 19 years, and yet they walked alike, they had the same, taste in clothing, they loved the same colors, they smoked the same brand of cigarettes. The terrain that this film goes over and over and over again, right? So kind of... The
film shows an awful lot of footage from TV appearances and things at the time.
That's right, on Donahue and...
Of them showing off this likeness between them.
That's right. So, and obviously all that was emphasized was the likeness, not the differences, which is one of the points that the film makes. But narratively, the film structures a mystery, which is very interesting. So, so initially it's made to seem as a happy accident. Then it becomes kind of rather sinister, right? Because why did this agency put triplets with different families rather than putting them together? And then that's rationalized away, right? But then kind of you find out that in fact, kind of they're part of a study. And, the families have never been told that they were part of the study, right? So, and you have kind of people coming in to check on the children, and the children are followed, and films are being made of them, and, the family's given one story, but actually, kind of, basically, this is they realize eventually that they've been part of an experiment, right? And an experiment that has particular protocols. So actually part of the protocols is to put them with families of a different class. Part of the protocol is also to give them each an adopted sister that's just a couple of years older, right? And presumably there are other identical twins or identical triplets that are fulfilling kind of, a different role in this study. So then
we see a different pair of identical twins, women.
That's right.
Who I recognise actually. I didn't know the guys, but I did recognise them. That they released a book in the last 10 years or so, which I had vaguely heard of. So they were familiar to me.
That's right.
But, yeah.
So the film is one of all kinds of resonances, because the first thing one thinks about actually is Dr. Mengele, right? Kind of, experiments on, the kind of,
Well, particularly on Jewish people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And except, of course, this has another resonance, because really, you're playing with people's lives. You're using people's lives, as an aspect of a study, and you're doing it all without their consent or their permission. Only 10 years or 20 years after Dr. Mengele had done, well, in his case, there were genetic experiments, and
so many things.
Yeah, there were so many things. But actually, with the legacy of that, and with that being so recent history, for a Jewish agency, and a Jewish doctor,
Peter Neubauer, who was Austrian-born and actually fled the Holocaust.
That's right. To be engaged in experiments that are not a million miles divorced from that, is very weird and disturbing.
Yes. But I have a number of issues with the film.
Well, so do I, but let's hear yours first.
Well, I've got a whole kind of legion of...
Take your notes out.
Yeah. As to the Holocaust, the references are clear. These are particularly Jewish children that are being experimented on. As I said, this comes from a Jewish adoption agency, and they're placed with Jewish families.
Yes.
So there is more than a flavour of the Holocaust, even beyond just the playing with people's lives aspect. And there are 2 points at which you meet people who were involved in the study. One is this lady, obviously they're very old now, but one is this lady and one is a guy, and they both mention, they both make some sort of reference to, I wasn't in charge of it, I was only there for a bit, I wasn't there at the beginning.
Yes.
And I whispered to you in the cinema, they were only following orders.
It has very much that feel.
Yeah, a very distinct feel of that. And they offer, kind of some defences of the study. But I think it takes more than making reference to the Holocaust, which the film does explicitly as well as implicitly. There are there are people interviewed who literally say the word and talk about the similarity. So it's not something the film is trying to just imply. It's right there. I think it takes more than that to actually build a case as to why this was an evil thing to do, and I don't think the film does. I have complete sympathies with the subjects, the families and the kids who are being studied. I have complete sympathies with them. But I do not think that the film makes a convincing case for why it was an evil thing to do or why such studies shouldn't be done. I think the film assumes that we will just agree with that and doesn't bother to actually investigate that. And I find that a real problem.
Okay, well, let me give you my view, my take on it, which is actually that I think it was unethical and unconscionable. I think you're right that maybe the connection to the Holocaust that the film makes and that I was making a little while ago might be extreme. And actually, I think you're right. One has to be careful about those things. But the film makes it explicit to me why it's unethical to do that. Because it is people's lives, because you don't know the effects that certain things are going to have on them, because it went against the ethos of both the adoption agency and what the adoption agency was telling the parents or not telling the parents.
Absolutely true. That's
right.
Very true.
So the all of that was unethical. Now kind of how far you want to take. The metaphor of playing with people's lives, or
I'd rather drop
people as experiments.
I'd rather drop the Holocaust thing, to be honest, because I think it is actually quite basic, and it's not something that is actually hugely interesting.
Let's drop.
And I don't think the film makes much of it. I think the film uses it, but it feels extremely manipulative to me, and I don't think it actually makes much of it. So I'd rather actually drop that part of it now that we've acknowledged that it's there.
Good. Let's move forward.
You're absolutely right that the lying to the parents. So there's this thing about once the kids had all met at the age of 19 and started to go on together, the parents are asking, well, what happened? And they went to the adoption agency. I can't remember the name of it. So
it's the Louise something, but anyway, it's not important. But it was the biggest Jewish adoption agency in the East Coast. And again, it was
premier. It was the cream of the cream,
and ostensibly very powerfully connected and so on. Though one of the things that I hate about the film is they tend to say things like very powerfully connected, and then, well, who are they connected to?
Yes.
Right? Like, who are these powerful people or these powerful connections?
That's another issue. But they go to this is a serious issue, and they meet the board members, the parents do, and it's explained to them that if they tried to put the kids up as a set of triplets for adoption, it would be very difficult to place all three with one family. And the blue collar dad, who is this one that is called Bubbler, which is Yiddish for kind of friendly and life affirming, whatever, all that sort of stuff. He's the dad. They all once the other two meet him, they kind of graft onto him as well, and he says, "I have two more sons." He seems like a lovely bloke. He's unfortunately not able to be interviewed because by the time the film has been shot, he's passed away. But in this meeting, he says, "Well, I would have had all three." Obviously, so like it's bullshit that the explanation that's given. But they kind of leave with it because what option do they have? And then one of the parents, having realised that he's left his umbrella, goes back inside and sees these board members cracking open a bottle of champagne and kind of toasting that they've dodged a bullet. Which, there's hearsay in that, obviously. Like, you're having to trust what this guy said, but it's also completely believable.
Yes. I mean, they don't have a motive to tell you this otherwise.
No, especially when you consider the kind of further developments of the plot. So that aspect to the lack of ethics in this twin study is clear. I think self-evident. I think it's a problem with the film that actually so much of it is just self-evident, and the film fails to build a case for anything else.
Yes.
Because, like I say, I think that such studies being done may well be unethical in every case. But I don't think the film demonstrates that.
Well, I think the film demonstrates how this particular instance was unethical. So I don't think that the film makes... Well, I don't think the film makes a convincing argument that they should never be done under any circumstances. I mean, that would be foolish. But I think to me it does actually demonstrate why this was wrong with these three kids. And actually how they suffered from it. Right. The film then also makes claims that I think the film is almost unethical in kind of alluding to things that it in itself does not prove. So, for example, one of the arguments that the film tries to get you to leave with, without really offering any evidence, is that these children all suffered from mental illness to one degree or another, and that this was the result because they had been chosen for the study on the basis of their parents previously having had issues with mental illness.
The mother in particular.
Well, but also they mentioned the other children.
They mentioned the other children.
But again, it kind of, they can't find proof for it.
Absolutely.
So the film takes one instance of the first meeting of the triplets, meeting with their mother, and saying, she drank as much as we did and we were only 19 and could handle it. To then extrapolate all kinds of things that you're never given reasons for.
Yeah, well, at one point, and I really hate the filmmaker who's the one asking the questions behind the camera. You do hear his voice occasionally. He's an English guy, and I just found out there's an interview with him on DP30 on YouTube, and he says at the start he's 39 years old.
Right.
So he's kind of young-ish.
Right.
And not as old as these guys, certainly. And I found him just to be a horrible prick. Because
don't mince words.
No, I didn't like it at all. So, and again, hugely manipulative, and it's not just through the filmmaking, which is hugely manipulative, but also through the questions that he occasionally asks. Because most of the time, it's just what appears to be unprompted kind of speech from the various subjects, but occasionally his voice pops in asking a question to prompt an answer. And it's that point where he says, "Do you think that your mother may have had mental issues?" Something along those lines. and it's David who's the blue collar son, who's
he's my favorite.
He's my favorite. He's a very entertaining one, and very talkative and very Jewish
and very intelligent.
And yeah, hugely intelligent. And he really doesn't want to give an answer to that. You can tell. You know what the filmmaker wants is for him to say something like, "Yes, maybe she did," which is eventually what he kind of talks himself around to saying. But he's very hesitant. Yes. He says, "I don't know. I guess maybe she did." Like the one thing that you are expecting to have spoken about is alcoholism, because basically the only time the mother comes into the film is to say, "We met her. We found out that this was a prom night fling, so she was very, very young, and she'd have to give it 3 triplets, and there's this implication of her being an alcoholic because she keeps up with them while they're drinking very heavily."
But that could just be nerves at meeting her 3 children that she hadn't met for 19 years. I mean, that's absurd.
Because then they go on to say that actually she didn't form a very big part of our lives after that, and again, it's left. It's not. There's no further investigation of that. So it is
okay
implied for you to say, but it's that bit where it's the filmmaker getting the subject,
coercing the subject,
I think,
a particular direction.
And there's another point, which is another very heavily kind of manipulative point, where you've seen an interview with the guy who was involved in the study, who they've been able to interview, where he talks about there was no talk of mental illness while I was there, at least, and he says, with us, it was about the parents. We were not only were we studying the children, but we were studying the way they were parented and what difference that made. And he says the thing about placing adopted sisters with them all, being a kind of control group.
This is how the film demonstrates how unethical it all is, because they're affecting the protocol, the control group lives. The parents are under surveillance without knowing about it, and the children themselves are kind of being put in situations that are not necessarily about their well-being, but actually, only in terms of providing a good study.
Yeah. And the point where that I'm getting to of the director being again manipulative very heavily is that the footage that he's shot of the interview with the guy explaining this, that we place these daughters deliberately, is shown to the 2 surviving brothers. One of them committed suicide, so again, he's not in the film. So the 2 surviving brothers, Bobby and David, are shown this footage on a laptop, and it's the first time they've seen it. And it's a shock to them, clearly, right? That they've just discovered that the sisters were a part of this kind of conspiracy too. And the director says something like, "How does it make you feel watching that?" I'm going, why do you need to prop that? Oh, that's disgusting. I mean, on top of the fact that you're putting this out as like this very, very... I know it's a film, and I know that it's been kind of presented for me to see interesting whatever things, but it feels way too intimate and way too personal, and like I say, emotionally manipulative to be showing that and to be doing that to these people.
Yes, well,
to do it to them on camera.
Yes, well, what I hated about the film, and actually I quite liked, I think it's a film of interesting ideas, but to me there are real problems with it. But the thing that I hated about it is that, you see, the bulk of the film is these triplets, right? And I think they're all lovely, and it's wonderful to see them, meeting each other at 19 and going clubbing, and it's almost like, they've got a ready-made family and ready-made friendships, and there's kind of like a joy in kind of what's evoked through that meeting, right?
There's a huge amount of joy in the first third of the film.
That's right. And then stuff happens, and you don't know what. So, the film sets you up to love these kids, get involved in their story, find them so interesting, set up these dynamics and relationships between each other and their own families, and and then as soon as things become difficult, the film backs off and leaves you without knowing anything, right? So you actually don't know why one of them committed suicide. You don't know why one of them left their business and went on his own and never spoke to them again. You don't know kind of why they re-meet again for this film. You have a sense that like something happened, it's a major thing, right? And so, what if the whole first third is about this joy in finding each other, then what happened? It seems to me a fundamental question.
Yeah.
You know, that the film...
The film offers some vague things. So it offers this vague thing about mental illness and the suggestion that they all suffer from depression, and particularly Eddie, the brother who kills himself, he seems to have been diagnosed after the fact as manic depressive. But again, it's just.
But what happened?
Exactly, it's just kind of offered by the film, and you're supposed to just kind of go, okay.
What you see is a very gregarious, charming person who's just gotten married, who's a child, whose ex-wife says, you know, he was so charismatic and he was the life and joy of the house and he was wonderful with children. And the next thing you know is he's committed suicide. And actually, I think it's fair to ask, why?
Yeah.
You know, and the film,
well, like I say,
doesn't even bother to tell you why.
The problem is that the film offers us a very poor answer, which is the film basically wants us to go, he was manic depressive because he was chosen for this study. It seems it wants to kind of link these things together. But actually, I think it's a problem in the film that, this is not entirely the film's fault, right? This study has never been published. And one of the structuring elements to the film is that these interviews take place telling the story of what happened between 1961 and basically the present day. And then when it gets to sort of the present day, the interviews end and they go off. And then you're with David in particular speaking to this Jewish agency and kind of childcare council, whatever it's called, trying to get a hold of these records. He says at I think it's Yale, at Yale Library, there's 60 boxes worth of the documentation, but it's under seal till 2066, right? So, but if I can get permission from the agency, from this council, then I can, from this board, then I can gain access to them, right? So the film goes from telling you the previous story to stuff's going to happen from now on, which is a perfectly reasonable kind of structure. But what it means is that because all of this stuff has never been published and not been seen and is completely secret, anything that could actually explain something is unavailable. Everything becomes very speculative.
But let me interject here, because I think that's one part of the story. But actually something that could have been explainable and that the film demands and doesn't give is just the interpersonal relationships amongst the brother. So fine, you might never, we might not know the answer of the study, right, and the effect that it had and how much, they were at fault and how structured it was and how much they're the result of an experiment. But actually what you can know about is, what happened amongst these three brothers? How did they feel about, what happened? And actually there's almost like, to me it felt almost like a longing to know, because of how the film had set you up in the first third to really like these people, right? And then it sets you up to really like these people, and then it leaves you in the dark about all of them.
Yeah. Well, so what I'm kind of getting to, I think if we combine our points,
yes,
what we're kind of saying collectively is that when it comes to talking about what happened to these guys and what was the source of the problems and so on, the film ignores things that it can talk about.
Yes.
The interpersonal relationships and whatever, things that aren't necessarily speculative but are actually based on experience, and it concentrates on things it can't talk about, which is the things that are in the study that it kind of it suggests. Oh, so there's mental illness involved, but you don't actually know anything, and it's purely speculative on part of the film. And
then it tries to make an argument anyway. So
exactly.
What it leaves you with is these parents of these kids saying, you know what, I used to think it was more like nature than nurture, and now I really believe that it's more nurture than nature. And you think, well, fuck me silly, right? Like, how did you come to that conclusion, right? Like, I mean, it's really just what the film wants to say, but actually it hasn't shown you anything to demonstrate any of it.
And it doesn't follow any kind of thematic through line or anything like that. Like, I hate the ending because it ends up with people saying, it's really nurture overcomes everything. And you go, okay, right, you believe that, that's fine. But the film has not been talking about that.
Yeah.
Not even tangentially. And I mean, it is an interesting question. Like, if you ignore the huge ethical boundaries that were crossed as to how the study was done, the actual, like, the point of the study or a point of the study of discussing nature versus nurture is interesting. But it's not something the film actually does at any point. It's just right at the end someone picks it up.
And it does something much worse than that, I think. Because really what the film does is it tries to lay the blame of Eddie's suicide on his father's parenting skills.
Yes.
Right? It tells you he was too severe. You know, he was a loving man, so it doesn't want to paint him in a completely negative way. Maybe I didn't teach him what he needed to know, the father says. Right? But what the film kind of is really telling you is, you know, he was too harsh, he was too much of a disciplinarian. The kid always felt like he was in the wrong family. Well, perhaps, right? You know, but actually, maybe he just had a really bad drug experience, right? Maybe he was addicted to some drug that really made him feel down for long periods of time. You don't know. And the film doesn't explore it, right? So actually, to not explore it and to lay the blame on somebody who has clearly been a nice person, a responsible parent, right? Yeah, and just kind of leave the blame hanging there, I think is really unethical.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely hate the filmmakers. I hate them, and I want to mention the director's name is his name's Tim Wardle,
right.
The director, and like I say, he's English. You can hear from his voice. He's clearly kind of reasonably well educated. He speaks well and so on and so forth. And I just found him to be. It was like like a tourist, like trolling for story. I absolutely hated him. And like I say, I cannot remember seeing such a manipulative film in a very, very long time, if ever. I found it absolutely awful. And it's interesting. I mean, like I say, I have every sympathy with the subjects involved, but I don't hate the two people we saw who were participants in the study, as in from the research side. I didn't hate them, and one of the reasons that I didn't hate them was because the film was asking me so blankly to hate them. Like, so when you're introduced to the old lady for the first time, they don't initially get into talking about the study, right? When you're introduced to most of the interview subjects in the film, it's during an interview. They're sat there and they're talking either at the camera or to the off camera to the person next to it, like in that classic interview style, right? When you meet her, you're not. When you meet her, you go to her house, and before you get into the interview, she's showing you pictures of her with Michelle Obama and Barack Obama and kind of film stars. Robert Redford, I think, is in one of them, right?
Yes.
And the film is basically the film is set up that she is part of this unethical, evil study,
yes.
And then it's showing you her showing off.
Yeah.
It's asking you to hate her so strongly, and I really resented it. Right, so I wasn't like, no, I love this woman, but I was saying, no, you have to do more than this. You have to demonstrate. You have to, and it wasn't. It was awful. And then I noticed one particular cut during the interview when they get into talking about the study. I forget exactly what she says, but it's offering some form of defence of it, of saying or explanation of what the study was meant to be. It's a problem that I can't remember exactly what she says, but the thrust of what she says is something that you as the audience are being asked to see as an evil thing that she doesn't see as evil.
Yes.
You know, like basically something along the lines of, we thought it was fine that we were doing this, right? And then the cut that comes doesn't come quickly, and I really noticed this. It leaves a second or two before it cuts, so that it lets her smile, right? And it's not a smile that necessarily means, "Ooh, I'm evil," but that's what the film it is. I think felt edited so manipulatively.
Well, as you know, my memory's not good, but I think kind of the line was, "Well, the experiment's not over until everybody dies."
Maybe that, I can't remember.
So kind of, yeah.
But the film is asking you. The film is giving you all these, and it's shaping itself.
Yeah.
So as to encourage you to think of these guys as evil and these guys as good, and I'm just not convinced that that's necessarily the case.
Okay, well let's.
And so actually, the real evildoers in the film are the filmmakers.
Okay. So can we wrap it up then? So this is a film about unethical behavior that actually
behaves unethically. And which Mike hates with a passion. I really do. And it's not only that it's hatefully unethical, but it's also that it's actually as a film really bad. You know, like as you pointed out quite well, it picks up things and throws them away. It doesn't concentrate on the right things. It doesn't offer kind of conclusions based on evidence or anything like that, which as a documentary it should be trying to do. It doesn't build convincing cases for anything. It assumes your knowledge. It assumes your sympathies. And it just kind of, it says, I want to look like this kind of documentary looks like, and it'll win loads of awards. And there are a couple of other more minor things that I didn't like, which are
Spill them out.
Yeah, also...
Get it off your chest.
I found the sound mix very heavy.
Uh-huh.
I don't know about you, but certainly early on, when you're first being told the story of how Bobby moves schools, there's music that is really loud. There's music that's really loud, and there's sound effects that's really loud, like the car driving, that actually blocks out some of what he says. And you get the feeling that, okay, some of what he says is not, like, at that point, getting every word is not that important, because he's only talking about what the drive was like. It's only colour to fill in the storytelling. But still, it felt like a bad, aggressive sound mix to me. Weirdly.
Okay.
And the other thing is, and this, I really hated this. But this is grammar Nazi stuff. Right?
Let it out. No, let it go.
This is a grammar Nazi thing. Right at the end, the film closes by putting up a couple of intertitles that say, now that as oh god, it's so self-aggrandizing. As a result of this film, the board is now giving giving the guys access to 10,000 pages of documents, or whatever, as a result of this film. Oh, aren't we great?
Yes.
And then the other thing it says, and I wrote this down on my phone quickly, so it's roughly speaking what it says. It says, however, they contain no formal conclusions and have been heavily redacted to protect the identity of the other subjects.
Yes.
Right? Now, there should be a comma between however and they, which there isn't, and it should be identities of the other subjects, not identity.
Okay, you're being a bit of a wanker
No,
now.
I'm not. Because that actually counts, right? You should, like, it's stupid. It's stupid, and it's badly written. It's like on panel shows on the BBC when they say this team have as opposed to this team has. You know, getting your conjugations right matters.
Okay, I think this is a good moment to wrap up this film. So this has been a really extended rant by Michael Glass on kind of the many weaknesses of this film.
Weaknesses is putting it strongly.
How would you put it?
Sorry, weaknesses is putting it weakly.
You're addled. The hatred is addling your mind.
It's aggressively bad. I'm sure it is absolutely possible to make a very, very strong case that not only this particular study, but studies of this nature at all are ethically wrong. I think this film assumes that of us and doesn't put any work into actually demonstrating it, building a case. And there was one other thing, which was an insult, which was it's reasonably early on in the film. There's a kind of revelation. There's a revelatory plot point where they realise that the adoption agency has been manipulating them to. So it wasn't just that. They split them up because it was easier to place them, but actually they did this deliberately as a study, and it's done in the form of like a usual suspects kind of realization moment, you know, kind of epiphany, and it has loads of flashbacks of the kids going, you know, we were just like each other, and it does it like the usual suspects where it shows clips from earlier on, and I thought. Like, there's barely been half an hour, 40 minutes of this film. You're expecting me to have forgotten this stuff? Yeah. It's very, very obvious. And actually, it was an insult to my intelligence as an audience member. The film assumed I was stupid, I think, when it did that. Which, again, I really, really take issue with.
Okay, I think we've now had about, 30 different reasons for hating this film.
It's horrible. And you know the final horrible thing is that absolutely everyone seems to love it.
Ah.
The reviews have been amazing.
Okay, well, we'll put a damper on that. So this has been Eavesdropping at the Movies. We are now at 35 ways to hate.
Whatever the fuck this film is. 3 identical strangers. Yes.
Thank you very much for listening. We are on...
we're on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And our website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com for the full list of 100 and some podcasts so far. What a horrible film and a horrible film.